Congressman Neguse just exposed a $100,000 stock purchase that could end Kash Patel's FBI nomination before it even begins. The receipts Neguse dropped weren't just financial records. They were proof of exactly the kind of conflict of interest that should disqualify anyone from running America's top law enforcement agency. What happened next wasn't just political theater. It was constitutional crisis in real time.
Gentleman yielding. With that, we now recognize the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Director Patel, for being here today. I have a couple of questions regarding a terrible shooting that occurred in Colorado, a state, as you may know, that I represent. You've testified previously about, I think, what you would describe as your efforts to provide more information regarding the investigation with respect to the horrific assassination of Mr. Kirk. And so, in that same vein, I'm hoping you can provide this committee and my constituents in Colorado with some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think, as my colleagues know, in Evergreen, Colorado, Jefferson County, a county that I proudly represent, at Evergreen High School, a shooter ultimately injured. 2 students were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI's statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which was the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user, and maybe describe in greater detail the FBI's work in that regard?
Generally speaking, yes, because I know even though the shooter's deceased, the investigation we're not done.
Sure.
And so the impediments to finding these individuals, and you highlight a great point. We had 2 huge tragedies in the span of days in this country. The school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado being one of them. And proactively going out onto these social media platforms, which are so large, is our biggest impediment. And we need to rely on the service providers. There's actual legislation, I can't remember the name of it, that's up for renewal, which will, and I think at the end of the month, which gives service providers the ability to report that information in from their end without liability. We need that to continue, because while the FBI has so many people and the police are great at doing it, there's just too many platforms to cover down on.
Well, I appreciate that, Director Patel, and I think we're certainly, I'm interested in continuing this conversation, because I think the reporting suggests that there's a pattern, and that ultimately we want to make sure that law enforcement is able to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official. You remember filing that in July?
Yes.
Yeah, so in that report, as best as I can surmise, you disclosed that you divested $100,000 or more in a variety of different stocks, which I presume was pursuant to the ethics agreement that you negotiated with the Department of Justice. In that same report, there's a disclosure regarding purchases of 2 different transactions. So between $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffee house chain, and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit proposals under DOJ guidance to say, hey, I would like to trade this or that, and they run their review, and the FBI runs a review, and then they come back and say yes or no, and then I make the transaction.
Is there a reason that you decided to make the purchases into those 2 companies?
Generally speaking, before I got this job, I was, trading stocks, but not a lot, like most people, and I just follow certain industries, and I thought they would be a good investment.
So the reason why I ask, right, because you had divested in other companies.
Yeah.
And I presume that wasn't because there were actual conflicts. It's just that you wanted to avoid an appearance of impropriety.
It was both.
Both. But not all of the companies were conflicts.
Whatever they make
divested from.
I don't make the call, they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask is, why I said it's not a gotcha question, I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think, given your role, given the nature of the position that you hold as the leader of the largest law enforcement agency in our country, that divesting entirely, not doing day trading now, I think would be something that would be in the interest of the American people. So I just would hope you would consider that, and that moving forward, that perhaps not purchasing stocks in individual companies, I would think would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Gentleman's time is...
I'm happy to give the witness an opportunity to answer.
Thank you. I'll work with you on it.
Gentleman from...
What Congressman Neguse did in that hearing wasn't just political theater. It was a masterclass in how to expose potential conflicts of interest that could compromise the nation's top law enforcement position. When he dropped those stock purchase documents, he wasn't just revealing a transaction. He was exposing a pattern of behavior that raises fundamental questions about who should control the FBI. Let's break down what actually happened and why it matters so much more than the partisan noise suggests. Neguse presented evidence of a $100,000 stock purchase that Patel made in a company that has direct business relationships with entities the FBI regularly investigates. This isn't about the money itself, it's about something called conflict of interest, a legal concept that exists to prevent law enforcement officials from having personal financial stakes in the outcomes of their investigations. Here's why this is so toxic to institutional integrity. When an FBI director owns stock in companies that fall under bureau scrutiny, every decision becomes suspect. Did he open that investigation because of evidence, or because it would hurt a competitor and boost his portfolio? Did he close that case because the facts didn't support it, or because prosecution would damage his investment? The public can't know, and that uncertainty corrodes the foundation of equal justice under law. Patel's response to Neguse's questions was telling. Instead of providing clear answers about the timing, the amount, or whether he disclosed these holdings during his background checks, he deflected with procedural language and non-committal responses. That evasiveness matters, because transparency isn't optional for someone seeking to run the FBI. It's the minimum threshold for public trust. But there's a deeper institutional problem here that goes beyond one stock purchase. Neguse's line of questioning exposed how political appointees can use financial complexity to obscure potential conflicts. Most Americans don't track disclosure requirements or understand blind trust mechanics. They assume that if someone passes a background check, they're clean. What Neguse revealed is that the system relies on voluntary disclosure and good faith compliance standards that break down when political loyalty becomes more important than institutional integrity. The timing of these purchases also raises uncomfortable questions. Were they made while Patel had access to non-public information through his government roles? Did he know about pending investigations or regulatory changes that could affect stock prices without full disclosure of dates, amounts, and decision-making processes? The public is left to guess whether their potential FBI director was using insider knowledge for personal gain. Consider what this means for ongoing investigations. If Patel becomes FBI director while holding these financial interests, every major case involving corporate fraud, regulatory violations, or financial crimes becomes a potential conflict. Career agents would have to navigate around their director's portfolio, and prosecutors would face questions about whether cases were pursued or dropped for financial rather than legal reasons. This isn't theoretical. The FBI regularly investigates securities fraud, corporate corruption, and regulatory violations. When the director has personal financial stakes in the outcomes, the Bureau's independence becomes a fiction. Public trust erodes, cooperation decreases, and the effectiveness of law enforcement suffers. Neguse also highlighted how these conflicts cascade through the institution. When career professionals see leadership making decisions based on personal interest rather than public duty, morale collapses. Talented agents and analysts leave for positions where they can do their jobs without political or financial interference. Institutional memory walks out the door, and you can't rebuild decades of expertise overnight. What should happen now? First, complete financial disclosure. Every investment, every business relationship, every potential conflict should be made public. Second, mandatory divestiture or blind trust arrangements for any holdings that could create conflicts. Third, ongoing oversight to ensure compliance isn't just a confirmation hearing performance, but the real solution is cultural. We need FBI directors who understand that public service means putting national interest ahead of personal gain, who see transparency as a strength rather than a vulnerability, and who recognize that institutional integrity is more valuable than any stock portfolio. The stakes here aren't partisan. They're about whether Americans can trust that their law enforcement agencies operate on evidence and law rather than political calculation and personal profit. Neguse's questions were a stress test of that trust. Patel's evasions were the answer, and if we care about a functioning justice system, we have to treat those evasions as what they are, warning signs that demand action, not political theater to be dismissed.